Have you ever heard your own voice calling you from the woods? I hadn't either until last October when I went looking for a trail that technically doesn't exist. See, there's an old story that locals in a forgotten corner of the Appalachian Mountains whisper when the fires burn low. They call it the path that hunts you. Not haunted, not cursed. Hunts you. I thought it was a joke, a creepy folktale to scare tourists, until I found something buried in my late uncle's belongings. A hand-drawn map, yellowed and brittle, with a red line scratched violently across it. Next to that line, in his handwriting, never follow your own voice. My uncle disappeared in 1999. They said he was drunk, lost in the woods, but no one ever found his body. The thing is, the map marked a place no modern GPS recognizes. The elevation numbers were off. The trail he drew didn't exist. So I did what any idiot with too much curiosity would do. I went looking for it. I hiked for 6 hours that first day. I thought I'd reach the spot he'd marked, but there was nothing. Just empty forest, the sound of cicadas, and the unsettling silence underneath them. Until I heard it. Someone calling my name. The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't far away. It was soft, like someone standing right behind me, whispering in my ear, "Eli, come here." The hairs on my neck stood up because I was alone, and the voice was mine. You ever heard yourself calling you? Your brain immediately rejects it. You try to explain it. Echo, wind, some animal. But deep down, your body knows when something's wrong, even if your brain wants to make it logical. I turned. No one was there. I went home that night, shaken but convinced it was just exhaustion, until I started dreaming. Every night, the same thing. I was standing in the woods, staring at a trail that wasn't there during the day. And in the dream, I'd hear myself saying, "You're almost there. Just keep walking." It got worse. The dreams bled into reality. Randomly during the day, I'd hear it. My own voice, distant but clear, "Eli, this way." Even in crowded places, even at work. And every time, the whisper came from the direction of the mountains. After 2 weeks, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go back. But this time, when I reached the clearing from the map, the trail was there. A narrow, winding path cutting deep into the trees. Dirt undisturbed, no footprints. It wasn't on any map. It shouldn't have been there. And at the start of the path, nailed to a rotting tree, was a piece of paper. My uncle's handwriting again. "If you see the trail, it's already too late." I should have walked away. But my voice said, "It's safe now. Come home." I took one step onto that path, and everything changed. The woods around me went silent. Not like normal silence. Dead silence. No birds, no wind, no insects. The air felt heavier, like the trees were leaning in, listening. The deeper I walked, the stranger it got. Time felt off. My watch froze at 3:08 p.m. The sunlight stopped shifting. The path ahead seemed longer than it should have been, winding impossibly without gaining elevation. And then I started seeing them. People, in the corners of my eyes. A woman in a red coat, standing perfectly still behind a tree. A man crouched low, staring at me with hollow eyes. But when I turned to face them, they vanished. Until one of them didn't. About an hour in, I saw someone standing directly in the middle of the trail. It was me. Same clothes, same face, same tired, terrified eyes. He smiled. "You finally made it," he said. I froze, my pulse roaring in my ears, my throat dry. "You've been here before," he continued. "You just forgot." Then he turned and walked deeper into the woods. I should have run. I should have turned back. But something in me felt drawn, like I'd been waiting for this moment without knowing it. I followed. The path began to narrow until it felt like the trees themselves were closing in, scraping against my arms, whispering things I couldn't quite hear. And then, just as suddenly, it opened into a clearing. At the center of that clearing was an old, broken-down cabin, not marked on any map, not visible from above, hidden so deep in the folds of the mountain that you'd never stumble upon it by accident. But I recognized it immediately, because I'd seen it before, in my dreams. The front door creaked open. Inside, someone was waiting. Someone I knew. Someone I shouldn't be able to see. My uncle. He looked exactly like he had the day he vanished. Same flannel shirt. Same worn-out boots. He smiled without warmth. "Took you long enough," he said. Before I could speak, before I could ask how or why, he added, "Now you're part of it too." The door slammed shut behind me, and that's when I realized something chilling. I couldn't remember how I got there. Not just that day, but how I'd gotten there at all. Where I'd lived, who I'd loved, what my life had been. All I could remember was the path. The path and the voice calling me. My own voice. The cabin door slammed shut behind me, and the silence inside was louder than the forest. My uncle stood there, staring at me like I was a stranger. "You shouldn't have come," he finally said. "But you heard it, didn't you? The voice." I nodded slowly, heart pounding. My own voice. I whispered. He laughed, cold and hollow. "That's how it starts. That's how it hunts." I wanted to scream at him, to ask what this place was, why he vanished, why I couldn't remember anything outside these woods. But he raised a hand. "Listen." And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The voice hadn't stopped. Even inside the cabin, I could still hear it. My own voice, faint but clear, echoing from somewhere deep in the woods. "Keep going, Eli. You're almost home." My uncle stepped closer, and for the first time, I noticed his eyes. They were empty. Not dead. Empty. "You think you walked into these woods a month ago," he said quietly. "You didn't." "What do you mean?" I asked. "You've been here for years." I felt the floor drop beneath me. "No, I was at work just 2 weeks ago." "I remember." "Do you?" He interrupted. "Tell me what you did last Christmas. Tell me your best friend's name." I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Not because I was scared, because I couldn't remember. Not my friends, not my job, not even my own face before I'd seen it reflected in these woods. "This place doesn't hunt you like an animal," my uncle continued. "It hunts your memory, your life, yourself." He walked past me to the dusty window and pointed outside. "Every step you took on that path, you left something behind, a piece of who you were, until the only thing left is the voice calling people in." I shook my head violently. "That's not possible. I can leave. I just need to turn around and what?" He said softly. "Which way is home, Eli? Do you even remember where you live?" I ran to the door, yanked it open, but the path was gone. In its place, an endless stretch of woods in every direction. The map, the trail, all erased. "There's no going back once you see the path," my uncle said behind me. "You're part of it now. Like me, like all of them." I turned and saw them. Figures outside the cabin, standing between the trees. Dozens of them. Men, women, children. Empty-eyed, whispering in unison. "Come home. Come home. Come home." Each one was whispering in their own voice. That's when I understood. The path that hunts you isn't a place. It's a predator. It feeds on memory, on identity. It lures people in with the sound of themselves. And once you step onto that path, it begins eating you alive, piece by piece, until you become just another voice in the woods, calling the next person in. I looked back at my uncle. "Is there any way out?" I asked. For the first time, he looked almost human, almost sad. "One," he said, "but it's not what you think." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a rusty, blood-stained knife. "The path lives in your head now. It's carved itself inside you. You can't walk away from it, but you can cut it out." He handed me the knife. "You either lose yourself completely, or you lose the voice." And then I heard it again, closer this time, right behind me. "Eli, don't listen to him. Come home." It was my voice, but it wasn't coming from my mouth. It was coming from the trees. The knife felt heavier than it should have. I stood there, staring at it, my uncle's words echoing in my head. "You either lose yourself completely, or you lose the voice." Outside the cabin, the whispers grew louder. Hundreds of versions of my voice chanting the same thing. "Come home. Come home. Come home." I wanted to scream, to tear my ears off, to forget this place existed. But that's the thing about the Appalachian Path. It doesn't let you forget. It feeds on you trying. I turned back to my uncle. "If I use this, what happens to them?" He didn't answer, because the truth was written all over his face. No one escapes. You either become the voice, or you silence yourself. "You said there's one way out." I pressed. "What if I don't want to lose myself?" He shook his head. "The path doesn't kill you, Eli. That would be mercy. It turns you into an echo, a thing that only exists to pull others in. The longer you stay, the more real the voice becomes, until it's the only version of you left." I backed away, breath shaking. That's when I noticed something. The whispers outside. They weren't random. They were following a pattern. Every third word, every pause, every inflection, it was the same. I focused harder, and suddenly I realized they were repeating the exact same conversation I'd had with my mom the day before I came here. "I'm worried about you, Eli." "I'll be fine, Mom. Just promise me you won't go looking." My blood ran cold. These voices didn't just sound like me. They were me. My memories. My fears. My guilt. The path wasn't erasing me. It was recording me, playing me back over and over, until I believed I never existed beyond these woods. "How do I stop this?" I whispered. My uncle's face darkened. "You already know." And then he did something I'll never forget. He pulled back his sleeve and showed me his arm. It wasn't flesh. It was bark, veins twisted like roots under his skin. "You think I built this cabin?" he said quietly. "This cabin is the last piece of me. It's why I've been able to stay human this long." I stared at him, realization crashing over me. The path doesn't just take memories. It turns you into part of itself. The trees, the trail, the woods. They were made of people like me. People who stepped in and never stepped out. My uncle's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're running out of time, Eli. Every second you stand here, the path carves itself deeper into you." I clenched the knife tighter. The voices outside rose to a crescendo. "Come home, come home, come home." And then, silence. For the first time since I arrived, everything stopped. A single voice spoke from the doorway behind me. "It's not too late." I turned. My mother stood there, but her eyes, empty. And in that moment, I understood the final, awful truth. The voice that lured me here wasn't mine. It was hers. She'd come looking for my uncle years ago. She never left. "You were never supposed to come here," she said softly. "But now that you have, you can't leave alone." My uncle nodded grimly. "That's the real trap, Eli. The path doesn't want you. It wants the ones you love to follow you in. A choice. Cut the voice out of me and doom her to stay, or stay with her forever." That's when I realized why my uncle never left. He wasn't trapped. He was holding the door open so no one else would walk in. I looked at him, at my mother, at the knife in my hand, and I made my choice. I turned the blade toward myself, not to end my life, but to carve a word into my arm. Remember, the moment the blade scratched skin, the voices screamed. The trees shook. The cabin walls cracked. And in that instant, I saw everything. My childhood, my first love, the people I'd forgotten, the life the path tried to erase. The last thing I heard before the cabin exploded into light was my uncle's voice. "You broke it, Eli. You broke the loop." I woke up on the side of an empty trail. No cabin, no voices, just the cold Appalachian wind in my ears. The word remember carved into my arm. But here's the thing. When I got home, something was missing. Photos on my phone, conversations with friends. They don't match what I remember. Sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I hear again my own voice. "Come home." So if you ever hike the Appalachian Mountains, and you hear your name whispered from the trees, don't follow it. Because sometimes, the path doesn't just want you. It wants everyone you've ever loved.